Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip&Talk. You know we love to go deep on this show.
Deep dives.
Deep dives, exactly. And today, we are talking all about surveillance and privacy.
Ooh.
Yeah, a timely topic, right?
Definitely is.
It's a little creepy, too, though, right?
Yeah.
We dug through tons of research, even this paper, the debate on public surveillance and privacy rights.
A comparative analysis of China and the U.S. really gets into the nitty-gritty.
Our mission: unpack this complex issue, figure out why it matters to all of us.
Because it does, whether we realize it or not. Both countries use surveillance, that's clear.
But the methods, the justifications, that's where things get interesting. But before we get into all that, we have to say happy birthday to our friend Micky.
Happy birthday, Micky.
We figured for your birthday we'd give you a little something to think about. Maybe not the typical cake and balloons, but hey,
knowledge is power.
That's what we always say. So Micky, hopefully you were out there celebrating. And speaking of celebrating, this episode is actually inspired by Micky and their awesome YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
Yes. All that travel makes you wonder, with all those awesome locations.
Yeah, like how much is Micky actually being watched by all the cameras around the world?
Right.
So for today's deep dive, we are comparing and contrasting how two superpowers approach public surveillance. We're talking about China and the U.S.
Yeah.
So we've got this academic paper here that breaks it all down, and let me tell you, it's a wild ride.
It's like they're playing this game of who's watching you more.
I like that. And the rules were totally different depending on where you are.
Exactly.
So let's start in China.
Okay.
The paper really sums it up as security at all costs.
Yeah.
They've got cameras everywhere, facial recognition, AI, it's crazy.
Constant monitoring.
All to keep things running smoothly.
Yeah, maintaining that order,
And I've heard about this thing called the Sharp Eyes Project. Have you heard of that?
I have.
They want to blanket the entire country with surveillance cameras.
Yeah, it's a little intense. And the paper talks about how this approach, it's really rooted in China's political system. The government has a lot of control there.
Centralized, yeah.
Exactly. And they see this as a crucial tool for preventing crime, keeping society harmonious and...
Okay, so keeping an eye on everybody.
Yeah.
So in China, the worry is about surveillance being used to silence dissent, target specific groups.
And that kind of pressure can stifle free expression. You start self-censoring just to be safe.
So in China, surveillance is shaping behavior, not just catching bad guys.
That's the goal anyway. Promote harmony, encourage responsible citizens. That's how they spin it.
But it could easily be used to punish people for speaking out, disagreeing with the government.
Definitely a valid concern. But the key takeaway here is that a lot of people in China, they're okay with this trade-off. They'd rather have the security, even if it means giving up some privacy.
Okay, so flip the script over to the U.S.
Right.
And they also use surveillance for fighting crime, counterterrorism. But over there...
it's way more divided.
Yeah, public opinion is very divided.
It's a totally different landscape, right? You've got this strong tradition of individual liberty. People are really suspicious of the government overreaching.
And of course, the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Big deal. So any attempt to, expand surveillance, it's going to be met with pushback from privacy advocates.
It's like this constant tug of war.
Yeah.
Security versus civil liberties.
For sure.
And it feels like the lines are getting blurrier and blurrier all the time.
Totally. It really is. But to understand this better, we should look at both sides of the argument, right?
Okay, so let's hear it. What are the arguments for surveillance?
Well, the paper lays out some pretty compelling points. For starters, nobody wants to live in a world full of crime and terrorism, right?
Yeah, obviously.
So both China and the U.S., they use surveillance to try and combat these threats.
Right.
And in China specifically, they're seeing results. Crime rates are actually going down in areas with a lot of cameras. People feel safer, and it seems like criminals are less likely to act up when they know they're being watched.
Yeah, that makes sense. And remember the Boston Marathon bombing?
Oh, yeah.
That was a big one where surveillance footage was key in cracking the case.
Exactly. And you've got things like facial recognition popping up in airports and other public places.
That's true.
It's all about enhancing security. And the paper even mentioned the FBI's next generation identification system.
Right. They use fingerprints, iris scans, all that stuff.
A massive database that helps law enforcement catch criminals.
So basically, they're arguing that all this tech is making us safer.
Exactly. Helps catch the bad guys.
Okay. But I feel like there's always another side to the story.
Oh, there definitely is.
What about the people who are against all this surveillance? I know I can get a little freaked out knowing that I'm being watched all the time.
For sure, and that's where those privacy concerns come in.
Yeah.
The paper does a good job outlining those concerns, and they're pretty big ones. The biggest one, potential for abuse.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can see that. Like if there are cameras and systems everywhere, who's to say they won't be used for things they weren't meant for?
Exactly. And the paper even brings up some real-world examples of this. Like in China, there's been a lot of controversy over the government's use of surveillance to track and control the Uyghur Muslim minority.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a scary thought. Using surveillance to target certain groups.
It's a very real concern. And in the U.S., people are worried about facial recognition tech being used for racial profiling by law enforcement.
That's a problem for sure.
The tech isn't perfect, and there have been cases where people, especially people of color, have been misidentified, even wrongly arrested because of errors in the system.
That's messed up.
It is, and that leads to another big issue, transparency.
Right, like how do we know what's really happening with all this data being collected?
Exactly. It's a huge point of contention. In China, there's very little transparency about how they use that data, who can access it, what safeguards they have in place.
It's like a black box.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And even in the U.S., where we're supposed to have more checks and balances, it can still be tough to get a clear picture.
Remember the whole SoundOn thing?
Oh, yeah.
Really opened our eyes to how much the government was doing that we had no clue about.
Right. It was a wake-up call for a lot of people. It showed us that even in democracies, the government can overreach.
So what's the solution? How do we find that sweet spot between security and privacy? Can we have both?
That is the million-dollar question, and the paper dives into this a bit, especially with the rise of AI.
Oh, yeah. AI, that's a whole other can of worms.
It's a game changer when it comes to surveillance. Think about it. AI can analyze tons of data, recognize patterns, make predictions way faster than humans can.
Okay, yeah, that is kind of scary when you apply it to surveillance. What are we talking about here? Like Minority Report stuff.
Basically, imagine cameras that not only identify you, but also analyze your emotions, your walk, how you behave.
Wait, what?
They could predict if you're going to commit a crime or even just if you're having a bad day.
Okay, now that is creepy. So it's not just about recording what we do. It's about judging us based on how we act.
And that brings up some serious ethical questions, like who decides what's considered suspicious behavior? What if the AI gets it wrong?
Could people be punished for something they haven't even done? Just because some algorithm thinks they might do it?
And it gets even more complicated because some places are already pushing these boundaries. China is definitely leading the charge when it comes to using AI-powered surveillance. And their social credit system is a perfect example.
Hold on, social credit system. Like a credit score for how well you behave.
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Your score can affect all sorts of things, like getting a loan or even traveling.
Yeah, well,
If you've got a high score, you get perks and privileges.
okay.
But if your score is low, you might not be able to use certain services.
So it's like a reward and punishment system for being a good citizen.
Exactly. Critics say it's a way to control people, encourage conformity, and discourage anyone who steps out of line.
Yeah, that is wild. I mean, who gets to decide what's good anyway? That just sounds like a recipe for trouble.
And the paper points out that even though the U.S. doesn't have anything quite like that social credit system, there are some similar trends popping up here, too.
Really?
Yeah, like how the government is using data analytics more and more and relying on algorithms to make decisions that affect our lives. It's definitely something we need to keep an eye on.
So it feels like we're at a crossroads. Technology is amazing. It can do so much good. But it can also be used to take away our privacy and control us.
Exactly.
I mean, it sounds like we really need to figure out where we draw the line.
Yeah.
How much surveillance is too much? When does security outweigh our right to privacy?
Right. It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer.
Nope.
It's messy and complicated, but I think we have to remember it's not an all-or-nothing situation. We don't have to choose one or the other. We can have both security and privacy.
Yeah, it's like walking that tightrope.
Exactly.
Trying to find that balance between safety and freedom.
And we all need to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah.
Because the future of privacy really depends on us being informed, being engaged, and speaking up for what we believe in.
So how do we walk that tightrope?
Yeah.
What can we actually do to make sure we don't just sleepwalk into a surveillance state?
Well, the paper highlights a few things.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest one is transparency.
Okay.
We need to know what information is being collected about us, how it's being used, who has access to it.
Yeah, no more secrets.
No more hiding behind national security. We need to hold people accountable.
Agreed.
And along with that, we need strong oversight, like independent review boards, strict regulations, ways for people to challenge how their data is being used.
So like guardrails to keep things in check?
Exactly.
Checks and balances are always important, but
Yeah.
especially with something as sensitive as this.
And it's not just the government we got to think about. We need to be aware of how companies are using our data too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Google, Facebook, they've got mountains of information about us.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They're using it for targeted ads,
Yeah.
even trying to influence our opinions.
It can feel really manipulative.
Right. So we need stronger privacy laws that give people more control over their data.
We should have the right to know what's being collected, how it's being used.
And the right to say no.
Exactly.
We need to take back some of that power.
Right. It shouldn't be up to companies or governments to decide what happens to our data.
It should be our choice.
And this isn't just a U.S. thing or a China thing, it's a global issue.
Exact.
Surveillance tech is everywhere.
So we need international cooperation to set some ground rules, some safeguards.
Like a global privacy pact?
Exactly. A set of rules that everyone agrees to follow to protect people's data no matter where they live.
No, that would be amazing.
It's a big goal, but if we want a future where tech empowers us instead of controlling us, we need to start thinking globally.
Well, this has been a wild deep dive.
It has.
I'm honestly feeling a bit overwhelmed.
I get it. It's a lot to process.
But I also feel like we can do something about it.
Absolutely. We have a say in this. It's easy to feel powerless against all this tech, but we're not. We can choose how we use it, support organizations fighting for our privacy rights, and make our voices heard by contacting our elected officials.
We got to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay vigilant.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
But before we go, let's remember why we started this conversation in the first place.
Happy birthday, Micky.
Happy birthday. Hope you enjoyed this slightly unconventional birthday present.
Definitely.
And don't forget to check out Micky's awesome YouTube channel, Mickeytolife, for all your travel and good times. And hey, if you're worried about all those cameras, well,
At least we had fun talking about it.
thanks for joining us for this episode of Sip and Talk. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay private.
Cheers to that.
Man, this is heavy stuff. I'm starting to feel like we're being watched right now.
Maybe we should put some tape over our webcams, just in case.
Probably not a bad idea.